Welcome to another Rails quick tip. This is about database migrations in Ruby on Rails, and we'll be talking about how to roll back your specific migrations in this guide. And I've got a little markdown guide here to help myself, but the whole idea is to kind of present to you the quick tips I've learned along the way when it comes to rolling back certain kinds of data in the appropriate order, or a specific use case you might need to roll back in. By default, Rails has specific commands related to the database that it all prefixes with this db colon. We won't go into each of these, of course, but the idea is mostly about the db migrate area. And what we can look at just for starters is the status. So we could say Rails db migrate status, and that should give you just a look at what's currently in your database. I'm on SQLite. I just created a new Rails app. So far I've created users, posts, and comments just as a quick example. And all the status means is that they're up, which essentially means they're migrated. Now there's a migration ID on each migration itself, and that's basically just a timestamp at the point at which it was created. So you've got like the year, the month, and other details related to a specific time and second whatnot the file was created in. And that's how you would identify it specifically if you need to. And there's other ways to go about learning more about what's in your database status up and down. But you can run essentially Rails db migrate to migrate your database, which should be kind of obvious. And then once that's done, maybe you made a mistake along the way. So maybe there's something in one of the migrations that wasn't perfect, or you wanted to add a field. Typically, you could either add a new migration at this point, which is mostly the conventional way to do it, and something you'd want to do on a production-ready app. But if you're just in the process of creating a brand new app, the data doesn't really matter yet. You might configure this in such a way to go back and change something on the migration instead. So you would lose the data that might be in your database, but you'll gain that extra instance of the modified file, as opposed to creating a brand new migration and having a multitude of migration files in your stack. So it becomes a little more clean, I guess you could say, if you can help it. So there might become a time where you need to add more fields than you're not, ready to add. And commonly you'd want to either just add a new migration to take care of that, especially if you've got an app that's older or just already out in the wild. But sometimes, and something I like to do, is just to go back and modify the original source of truth on a very fresh app. So maybe you wanted to add more to the users table in this case. So I'll commonly do a Rails db rollback to get back a step that does one step. So notice it drops the table comments, and that's just the initial last migration we ran. So I'd have to actually run that 2 more times to get back to where I can actually edit this file manually and change things about it. So maybe I want to add a username. Save that down. Now we can run that migration, and that should go into effect. So now we're caught up. So you can kind of see the status of everything by the schema file if you have one. Basically, this is just a good way, like a read-only looking file, where you could see the current state of your database. And this is just basically brought to you by this DSL language that allows you to see what is actually happening under the hood with like real SQL code, as opposed to the Ruby interpreted stuff here. There might come a time where you need to go back like a ton of migration files. Maybe your app's older. Maybe you need to modify something way back in the beginning. You can go back further and go to a specific version if you want to. So I could say Rails db, migrate status. Here's how I would approach it. You'd want to find the one that you want to migrate back to. Say it's users again. I'll grab the migration ID, and then you could say Rails db migrate down version in all caps =, and then paste in that ID. It should go back to that and do that specific one. So that means if we go back into our status now, we'll just see that one being down as opposed to the other ones. So this is kind of useful if you just need to roll back that one migration. I don't know that I've ever really been in that situation where you need to, but sometimes you never know where that might make sense. But at that point, if you made changes, maybe you want to remove that username instead. Now we can just run that db migrate command, and that should be in good shape now. All of our stuff is migrated up. So the concept of up and down is from older versions of Rails. Nowadays, there is a change method, which is essentially going to be something that runs forward or backward. And the idea is that whatever you create in a migration, you can actually remove in the same migration. So used to be there would be two methods in these files, so def up or down, and that would kind of follow the same protocol, just a different convention. So it's just something to take into account. If you see an older tutorial out there or a guide or something, that's what's going on. One other one I like to do that basically rolls back everything up into a certain point is just to do Rails DB rollback, and then you can pass this step environment variable, and I'll do like maybe 2 here, and then it'll go back to specific rollbacks as opposed to just having to rerun this over and over, you know. So if we do Rails DB migrate status again, you should see that everything's down at the moment. So those are some quick ideas, quick ways to navigate that DB migrate folder. So I'll honestly use migrate all the time, of course, but then most of the time I'm doing rollback like so, and then I'll just do it a number of times. If it's a lot of files to roll back, maybe you gotta start over or something, then you could just do step equals 2 or something. And then say you wanted to even drop something you just created, you could just delete the migration, and then Rails will kind of pretend it never existed. Now you will need to go, if you generated those files, you will need to go delete those, but that might be a good use case for doing that whatever resource post. Maybe it's a scaffold we created for posts. You could delete all those accompanying files in such a way. I have another little quick tip on this if you check the other videos about doing that, if you should need to. So hopefully that was helpful. The DB feature set is quite vast, so there's a lot more to it. If you want to check out the API docs, you'll see stuff around setting up the DB, the actual database, changing your database configuration, the schema, cache and stuff like that, replanting seeds, everything, all that stuff. Pretty cool. We'll discuss more of this as it comes up in this series.